Hey guys, Brian Raisin back with you for week 2. And guess what? I don't own only one red shirt. I'm just filming week 1 lecture and week 2 back to back in case you just watched week 1 lecture and are wondering what on earth's up with Raisin. I don't get it. Anyway, so guess what? I'm over at the 4-H Center today, and you can see the flags. I'm in the international room. A lot of you may have been here as either 4-H or extension educators, or you may have been here as a nonprofit person or for some event having to do with extension. I hope you have. If you haven't, come up and visit sometime. It's a great building, first lead building on campus. And again, for those of you online, I want to make you feel very welcome and like you are part of Ohio State. So move around campus a little bit and have some fun with that. All right, chapter 2 or module 2A, so a 2-part. I'm gonna again fly through this very quickly, kind of 30,000 foot level, and then let you dig into reading and the articles that are examples, and then we can jump into some discussion and again learn from each other. That's my approach, and that's how I like to think about this class, especially on the graduate level. So, all right, let's jump in. Let's get going. So optional reading. Again, a lot of you read Caffarella and Daffrin as undergrads. If you didn't, then I highly recommend getting it because it's a great book. It's a resource that I've kept from my graduate school days, and it's just got really great stuff in it. So it's the reason I didn't want to assign it though. I didn't want you to make you go out and buy another book if you already had it, or if you'd already read it and then sold it back or something. So you'll want the book anyway, so go buy it. Okay, so what are 5 kinds of foundational knowledge that are especially important when we're thinking about adult learners? We're back on this, we're continuing on this track of adult learning. So learners who are adults are different from kids. There's a difference in andragogy and pedagogy, and there's a reason for that. We bring a lot, well, we're going to talk about that, so I'll jump in a minute. Cultural differences. Often we see varying approaches when we're working with adults and in adult learning. Relationship building is mandatory. It's mandatory in pedagogy too as we work with youth. But for adults, it's a different level. It's a different approach. And the authors and the optional readings get into that. And you also see it in the articles that show some of this in practice in real life. This one this week I think is an extension, Journal of Extension. Power and interest. Does anyone dispute that this exists? So think about who gets to determine who learns and who learns what. Not as kids, because we're kind of used to that, this P12 education system, but as adults, is it based on your job? Is it based in your community? There are so many variables here. Highly interesting and highly worth thinking about, particularly if you're designing a program for some group or as part of your work. You've got to have that in mind. Technology, ever-changing, pervasive, so many ways to reach adults using that in really new and creative ways as well. So don't shy off just because some of the adults you may be teaching aren't digital natives. Not a worry, you can still do a lot with tech. All right, adult learning. We're thinking about experiential learning. Learning that's based or influenced by previous life experience. Does what I'm learning make sense with what I've seen in real life? So think about this reflection on action. Learning holds true to your experience. You've seen it, you understand it, so it makes sense. So you learn and you move on. Versus, or in a different way, is reflection in action. So we create the opportunity while they're in the learning environment. Think about 4-H or FFA, learn by doing. The hands-on approach. It's very different and equally impactful. But just 2 different ways of thinking about how adults are experiencing their learning environment. You've got to have this in mind in the beginning when you start doing your planning for programming. Transformational learning. If you remember, well, I'll tell you about that in a minute. Mesereau, we'll jump into that. But transforming the way adults think, or in their values, beliefs, perspectives that they hold. Key, how they interact with the wider world. That's what we're trying to think about. So some techniques, and this is just a couple of examples: storytelling, reflective writing, conversation, coaching. Think Bloom's taxonomy here. You can still go with foundational knowledge and then move upward in that taxonomy. I was trying to think of the organizing system, I guess, will be the definition of taxonomy. And so that's still valid, but it's different with adults because we have this additional life experience. So some of these other techniques can be really powerful. I'm studying storytelling right now, looking at storytelling as pedagogy and andragogy. I'll give you an example. I was in Miami County as an extension educator about 5 years, and I taught a court-mandated co-parenting program. So think about two people who've gotten divorced, and the court says, you have to go sit in a classroom for a couple of hours and listen to some guy tell you how to be a parent. Whew. It was not, I'm going to say a not hostile audience. Well, there were times, not when I taught it, but some of my colleagues taught it, that they actually had to have police officers in the room because those folks didn't want to be there and they were hostile. So how can we transform the way they think and act in this co-parenting environment? That was our challenge. How could we change their perspective, give them lessons on perspective, seeing through things through others' eyes, for example, the eyes of their children, so that the kids would not have such a negative impact of when those parents would have to, trade off or hand off the young person, their child, for the weekend or something like that. It was powerful. I had people who came in really unhappy, but who left because of storytelling, but because of creating an environment where people could talk together and share and understand and reflect. They left many times. People gave me hugs, and I was like, it's just, I was just a delivery guy. Other folks wrote the curriculum, and they did a fantastic job with it. But it changed, it transformed the way they thought. Very powerful. That's all starts with program planning, and that's what you guys are going to be doing. That's the point of this class. It can be huge. Okay, adult learning. Let's also, as we're starting this idea, think about non-Western or indigenous ways of knowing. These are things that we don't necessarily always think about either. When we think, oh, we need a program to do X, let's just go out here and do this. Well, just an example of non-Western or indigenous way of knowing, perhaps spiritual knowing, grounded in culture and beliefs. Culture, oh my gosh, you could dive into that for weeks, for semesters. The main idea here is that these values, beliefs, practices are different, distinct from that of other groups. So we need to keep these things in mind, particularly as we're working with different cultures. Or even if we think it's a homogeneous culture, it may not be, because we don't always see the diversity that exists within people. So things to think about. So as we talk more about co-creating learning, which is an extension way that we're really, in fact, in our college, we're talking about students as co-creators. How do we come along and learn together with them? Well, here's some recommendations for approach. Think authenticity. If you took the 8420 class, if you've taken that leadership class, authenticity is a huge piece of what I talk about in leadership and leadership theory. Think about an environment, creating an environment that allows for exploration of the cognitive, the affective, the relational, things that we don't always pause to think about when we're putting this stuff together. We say, oh, I'm just going to put together a program. It's very simple. I got the outline. Boom. Nah, there's more. Collaborative work. How can we bring people together? Multi-dimensional ways of learning. Relationship building in adult learning, another component, very important. Starting as a part of the design process. The key idea here is to make contacts with the critical community leaders before you jump in and just to say, this is how I'm going to do this. Think about Jamie Oliver's Food Revolution. I don't know if you ever saw that. It's been probably 4 or 5 years ago now. He wanted to change behavior. He's this crazy British chef. He's really cool. But he wanted to change eating habits. So what did he do? He started with the school and with the local government. He started talking with them and then said, how can we move into the school? How can we do things to really help people learn and see and understand that there's an easy way to cook, that you can have healthier food, but it's habitual. And so how can we do this? So he had a whole program development. Some people might have said he was crazy, but he also had some positive impact. I have friends at West Virginia University and West Virginia State, the HCBU that's there in Charleston, and they worked with him on some of this, and they have some groups that are continuing, that are looking at healthy food, healthy eating, powerful stuff. All started with the program planning. Relationship building, come on computer, there we go. Power and interest. So this can be good or bad. Do you have an example where you've seen the person with the power through position, their reputation, their expertise, or their negotiation, or even coercion, twisting arms, to direct what's going to happen, what's going on. Something you've got to think about. If you're some of your audience members may be coming from a place of subjugation where they have been, they may look at you as the authority figure in the room and think, I can't learn from this person because of my life experiences or what's happening in my life right now. So you've got to think about these things. Where's the power in programming located? What's central? Who gets a say in the planning and designing the program? Whose voices are heard? Whose are ignored? Who gets a seat to sit at the planning table? 30 years ago in the 80s, when I was in the paper industry, we designed a cross-training program for our apprentices, our millwrights, our welders, our electrical. We had to really think, these were closely guarded and held jobs, but we wanted folks to be a little more versatile because we were losing $1 million a month, and we didn't want to shut the paper mill down. So we brought them to the table, though, to give them some of the power and say, then how can we design it so that we can improve the process? We're not going to infringe on your jobs because we want you to be experts in those small areas, but can we cross-train you? And so together we were able to work that out. It was really powerful. I'm talking labor management, very powerful stuff. We turned the mill around and it's still running today. I got a buddy down there who's the safety guy that I talk to every few months, and things are still going well. But the difference was made in that early planning and in sharing power. Technology and adult learning, key idea. I mean, again, this can be really powerful, especially in the planning stages when you're starting. The key idea, remember how technology may impact your learners who have different learning needs, different ways of knowing. We're talking epistemology here. Different cultural experiences, different sources of power. These can be game changers. They need to be thought of early in the process. So the supplemental reading, I've got some notes on this. I'm not going to go into detail because I want to have it in the discussion board, but in this article on experiential learning, First Extension Professionals, this cross-cultural immersion program. So it's a review of that program, talks about what happened, and it's very applicable to this week, to thinking about adult learning. In summary, there were a couple of challenges that they identified. The need for flexibility in identifying and serving clients with diverse needs, and then developing necessary skills to meet those. So what they do, they created this cross-cultural immersion program, and well, you'll read the article, but they traveled for a week in Latin America. They looked at benefits and challenges, the appreciations, the firsthand experiences, those sorts of things. And then what were the challenges afterward? And again, you can look at the slide deck and you can read. The persistent challenges after the programming was over. But here's the key. And this is last semester, or if you've even a year ago taken the leadership and administration class, 8420. If you haven't taken it, it's a fun class. Mesero. So the notion that, excuse me, participants had the ability to reflect. So back to Bloom, or Defink Significant Learning, reflecting on their experience and transforming that into action. That's the transformational learning piece. So one component, transformational learning, refers to the process where we transform our taken for granted frames of reference, our perspective, our habits, mindsets, and make them more inclusive. But what's the context of that? This is probably the key to everything. Language, culture, specific social practices, and implication. Understanding will be enabled or constrained in the historical knowledge power networks. So now we're back to thinking about that power and that knowledge and how those things interact. This is absolutely the crux. If these supporting ideologies, so you look at history, supporting ideologies, they have to be brought into awareness and reflected critically by the learner to make possible a greater degree of autonomous learning. So if we don't put these pieces into play as we're planning our program and then doing the delivery in a classroom just like this, or in a church basement, or wherever our extension work may take us, or our nonprofit work, or our education work, then we won't have the impact. That context is everything, so it's a lot to think about. Okay, homework, don't forget your online discussion questions, and how'd I do? 15 minutes, I'll try to keep it short. Anyway, thank you guys, see you next week. Or actually for part 2B, all right.